Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at VCU, welcome to the September installment of the Alumni Lunch and Learn series. Today's session entitled Preparing for School Safety, Virginia as a National Model, with our speakers, Donna Michaelis and Dr. Haley Cleary. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Wilder School hosts free virtual events monthly, like this one. Each session features change agents, thought leaders, and policymakers who provide insights and commentary on the relevant topics of the day. My name is Stephen Dozier, and I am the Director of Development and Alumni Engagement out here at the Wilder School. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few announcements. First and foremost, we are the #1 graduate program in public affairs in the state of Virginia, and we're in the top 15% in the nation. We are also number 35 among public affairs graduate schools and have the 29th ranked public management and leadership program in the nation. We're really proud to be at the forefront of our field. Our most recent edition of the Wilder School in Action magazine is available online, so check it out by clicking the live link on your screen now. Lastly, join our Policy Bites newsletter for the latest news for policymakers by subscribing at wilderschool@vcu.edu. Now, a word from Dr. Susan Gooden, Dean and Professor at the Wilder School, Government and Public Affairs.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted that you are spending your lunch hour with us today for our Alumni Lunch and Learn series. And today's session will be on a very compelling topic, looking at school safety. But before we get to that, we had a very exciting event on Monday, which was our Wilder Symposium on Racism, Health, and Accountability. I know several folks attended, but some people may have missed it. This was the session that focused on the common book for this year, Organ Thieves, and it discusses the case back in 1968 when the heart of Bruce Tucker was taken without his consent at MCV and transplanted into someone. Governor Wilder was the attorney for the Tucker family and gave an outstanding presentation on Monday night at our Wilder Symposium on campus and virtually as well about the case. We've had a lot of requests for the video. You can view the recording now. It is available, and it will also be in the chat. So I did want to pass that along as well. And now to today's symposium. It is my delight to introduce a colleague of ours in the Wilder School, Haley Cleary, who is an associate professor in the Wilder School in our criminal justice and public policy programs. Haley is a well-recognized expert relative to adolescent justice issues. She has funded research from both the National Science Foundation and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And she has also given lots of comments in such media outlets like the New York Times and the New Yorker as well. So we're really proud that Haley has agreed to moderate today's session. Haley?
Thank you, Dean Gooden. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a particular pleasure and honor of mine to introduce Donna Michaelis as our featured speaker today. Donna is a longtime friend of the Wilder School. She is the director of the Division of Public Safety Training in the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety at the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. She has worked in the area of school safety since 1985, when she began her career with the Chesterfield County Police Department as the county's first child safety coordinator. In 1998, Donna joined the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services as a youth safety specialist in charge of school resource officer training. Ms. Michaelis assumed the responsibility of the newly legislated center at DCJS when it was established in 2000 as the result of the Columbine School tragedy. In her role, she provides training, resources, and technical assistance to all schools, colleges, and universities and law enforcement agencies across the Commonwealth on issues related to school and campus safety and specialized law enforcement. Ms. Michaelis is a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. So Donna, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. We're delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cleary. It's truly an honor to be here, and I'm excited to share with you everything that the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety is doing. So as you see my screen, I assume, I'm going to apologize up front. First of all, even though I was born and raised in the South, I talk very fast, and I especially talk fast when I'm excited about the information that I have to share. And Virginia is truly a leader in the nation, not because of me, but because of the great work that the General Assembly does, the people in the field, and just because of the awesome responsibility that we are given here to protect our schools, our students, our staff. And I would like to say, yes, I am old. I'm sorry we have to put numbers in there, but for 37 years, I've worked in school safety. And I'm happy to say, I'm sorry for the rest of y'all, but I have the best job in the Commonwealth. I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do, and my staff is equally as excited. And we are just really stoked to be able to share everything that we're doing. So if you ever wonder why it matters about what we're doing in school safety, we've all have children or know children or are related to people that have children in our public schools, grandchildren, stepchildren, and we all put them on the bus and expect them to come home to us safely. But unfortunately, the tragedies that you see in front of you, for those parents, those grandparents, those sisters and brothers, these kids do not come home. And we never want that to happen here in Virginia. We know that in Blacksburg, on the Virginia Tech campus, 32 souls were lost that day. And we never forget that this is why we do what we do and why we're so passionate and why we get up to do what we do. So with that said, we'll move on. If we can make this thing advance for me, there we go. So how do we continue to keep schools safe places to work and learn? And I probably have an hour-long presentation about why schools are safe, because it's easy to focus on the tragedies and forget that most of the time, 99.9% of the time, we put our kids on buses, take them to school, and they do come home safe and sound and better for having been at school. But unfortunately, because of the high profile of these tragedies, because we have 24/7 news cycle, we lose sight of the fact that our students are safe because we have great professionals working in schools. We have great first responders who are there to make sure that our children and staff remain safe. But what do we consider Virginia a safe school to be? It's more than just putting in locks and electronics access systems. It's more than bulletproof glass. It's physical safety, but it's emotional safety. Do our children feel safe at school? It's psychological safety. Is there trauma being addressed? Kids don't just come to school with their backpack full of books. They come to school with a backpack full of stuff that happens in their community, that happens in their home. And they come to school every day because that's where loving people are, there to encourage them, to make them feel successful, to have a vision for the future, and oftentimes to lift them out of a situation where they may not feel like there is a way out. So what is needed to continue to keep schools safe? And that's what I want to focus on, is that schools are safe places, and the statistics bear that out. In spite of the first slide that I showed, children are much more likely to be harmed in cars and at home and in the community and at malls and in other places than they are at school. And I don't have time to go into all that data, but the data does bear that out. So what is needed to have school safety? Well, first of all, I think you need a passion. You're not going to get rich off of out of public service. And I think everyone on the call can agree to that. You need passion and you need dedication. And the reason I say that is because 37 years in school safety, and there are still things I haven't gotten done that I want to get done. Government moves slowly, but if you keep taking a bite of the elephant, eventually you digest the whole thing. And so we're trying to just continue to chip away at the boulder, move things forward. And we do that in Virginia with what I call the best model that the nation has to follow. And I say that because I know that after every tragedy that occurs nationally, other states come to Virginia and say, how did you do what you did? How do we get something set up that works like the Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety? And I always start with legislation. We have to be rooted in legislation, not in an executive order, not in a nonprofit, even unfortunately, sometimes not in a institution of higher ed, because oftentimes that's not the best place to reach everyone. So our legislation is our foundation for what we do. It means that we're going to be here and we have something upon which to build our center. Partnerships are essential. We can't do this without our sister agencies at the state level, without our federal partners, and of course, without our localities. But mainly it takes strong programming. And I'm going to hit on the 4 strong programs that Virginia is known for across the nation. And then how do we shore that up with training, resources, data collection, and technical assistance? Because in every program, we have to have all of those other things or it's going to fall. So first of all, I always like to say Virginia is not for lovers, Virginia is for legislation, because we are very much on the forefront of having legislation before tragedies occur to make sure that we are doing the best and most applicable thing for our schools. So we were one of the first school safety centers set up in the nation in the year 2000 after Columbine. 27 school safety centers developed over the next 7 to 8 years, but most of them fell out by 2009. Virginia continues because we have legislation. It's not a political whim that comes and goes. We are rooted in legislation, and every year since 2000, somehow the General Assembly has added another mandate or added a tweak that added more responsibilities to our center. So the Virginia model is pretty simple, and that is very much what I just said. We have partnerships, we collect data because you know the mantra, obviously being in the Wilder School, that if you can't manage what you don't measure. So we must measure, we must collect data, but we don't collect data just to have data. We collect data and feed it back to our schools so they know how they can move the needle, move the metric on student climate, on other types of things. We provide training, we develop and review and disseminate resources, and we provide technical assistance. Some of the mandates that General Assembly has gifted us is we have mandates to do school security officer certification and programs, school resource officer certification. We're mandated to have threat assessment teams. Schools all have to do annual school safety audits, crisis management programs. Training is mandated for school personnel in school safety, and the list goes on and on. But I won't go into all of that because I really do want to focus on our programming and our partnerships. So as I said, this Virginia Center for School and Campus Safety serves all K-12 public schools, but we also serve all private schools. We make sure that whatever we put out, all private schools, entities are welcome to come to anything that we do free of charge. All law enforcement officers working in our streets, but also in our schools and campuses, and then of course all public and private universities. So here's where I really want to focus on. The Virginia model is strong because we have a robust school resource officer program. We have mandated threat assessment teams in K-12 and higher ed. We are the only state in the nation still that requires threat assessment teams in both K-12 and higher ed. And we are in the process of setting up community behavioral threat assessment teams with help from a grant from the Department of Homeland Security. We are definitely the leaders in the nation around behavioral threat assessment. We have a mandated safety audit program that includes certification of crisis management plans to the center, as well as annual surveys and climate surveys of all secondary and all staff. And then we have a very robust mental health and suicide prevention programming that we're rolling out. So let's first talk about SROs, which is where my heart is. I began, as Dr. Cleary said, in Chesterfield, Chesterfield Police Department, where we were one of the first counties, or the only county in the state, that put SROs in all middle and high schools. We also provided law enforcement ambassadors through a child safety officer program in Chesterfield so that all our elementary schools had representation from law enforcement in them throughout the school year. SROs in Virginia began in the 1990s for lack of a better word, in order to just jumpstart it with money from the Safe and Drug-Free Schools that came out of the feds. We also have Burn JAG money that went into it. So we began offering SRO grant programs in the early 90s, but we've had SROs in Virginia since the 1950s. And in Virginia, the reason that we are a model for the nation is that we are the only center for school safety that's based in a Department of Criminal Justice Services. Around the nation, most models place their Center for School Safety either in an institution of higher ed, a Department of Education, where they often have many other mandates, and school safety does not take the front page. They put them in attorney general's offices where they may come and go with the political changing winds. But in Virginia, they placed it in a very lean Department of Criminal Justice Services that services the entire criminal justice system. So we're able to dip our hands talking to victims, prosecutors, law enforcement, but also reaching schools. We have developed very Virginia-specific law enforcement partnership guide. So it's a very robust document that we've put out on how do you make school law enforcement partnerships work. We have an extensive SRO school administrator 5-day curriculum that has been stolen across the nation by other states that we willingly allow them to take from us. We are the only state that has its own specific SRO curriculum. We have a model MOU for law enforcement and schools that want to embark on SRO programs. We have behavioral threat assessment team training, a model policy, as well as a curriculum. We have an information sharing guide between schools and law enforcement, how to share information legally, even with all the federal mandates around that. And of course, we offer school safety training in a plethora of different topics. So over the years, as you can see, I like to say that we have a high saturation rate of SROs in Virginia. 96% of all high schools have SROs, 91% of middle schools, and elementary schools kind of fall out around the 45%. You'll see that it fell off in 2021. The reason that you see that is because most schools were virtual, and during our school safety audit, you'll see that they responded that they didn't have SROs mainly because they weren't in school for the full session. Our school safety audit just finished August 31st, and we will have new 2022 data, and so you will see that go back up again. So why do we have them? If you look, both students, classroom teachers, instructors, and staff all strongly agree, over 90% agree that the SRO makes them feel safe while at school. And that is, again, from the data that we collect annually through our climate survey. In 2020, the General Assembly passed legislation mandating that DCGS create an SRO certification process. So before then, an SRO could be any law enforcement officer that the local chief or sheriff decided to place in the school. Although most, and I would say 90% of SROs that enter schools willingly came through DCJS and took our 40-hour training because it gave them the tools they needed, the General Assembly in their wisdom thought we needed a certification process because at the time, Governor Northam was looking to not have a lot of more regulations. This kind of stalled for 2 years. And this year we are rolling out the certification process for SROs, which will not be done through the regulatory process, but through DCJS. We already have in code a list of all the various types of training that SROs need. So all of these things that you see listed here are code mandates that have to be included in our SRO training and that school resource officers have to take. But I would like to say, in addition to everything that's in our 40 hours, we probably offer 20 to 25 standalone trainings throughout the year that build on these topics and go even deeper into how do you deal with adolescent issues in schools. Back in 2015, there was a narrative that came out from CP, the Center for Public Integrity, that said Virginia was leading the nation in the school to prison pipeline, and that our rates of taking children to prison or jail was 15.8, as opposed to the next one down in the list across the nation at 6.5. We at the time knew this couldn't be because we had one of the lowest juvenile incarceration rates in the nation at the time. And we also knew that we were closing juvenile detention centers. And so we had Virginia Tech conduct a study looking at that data and what CPI looked at and compared us to across the nation. And in that objective report, it came out that we were not really 15.8. We were at 2.3. And if you went back to that list that CPI put out, that would put us down at the bottom of the 40, around 48th or 49th. Unfortunately, this narrative has continued to the detriment of SRO programs sometimes, but we know that due to that study that we were not leading the nation in the school to prison pipeline. And I can go into why that occurred, but the bottom line was because Virginia does a great deal of reporting on what goes on in schools, one of the mandatory reports was that they tell law enforcement if there was a student code of conduct violation that was also a misdemeanor. And that checkbox that went to DOE saying we told law enforcement was contrived to mean arrest and incarceration, when really it was just a referral or a notification that oftentimes did not impact even to the point of taking a report or an officer even talking to a child. One of the other things we have here in Virginia, thanks to Governor Youngkin, is we now have $27 million in our SRO incentive grant fund. Since its inception in the year 2003, we had about 1.7 million. It stayed consistent for about 15 years when they added another 3 million after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, bringing us to 4.7 million. It stayed consistent then until this year when they added 22.5 million. So we have $27 million a year to fund SRO and SSO, school security officer programs in Virginia. We're also launching a Handle with Care program. This is not what you would think it is coming from a school perspective where you deal with students with disabilities. This is a program that law enforcement initiates. We've replicated it from West Virginia, where anytime they run across a child that is at the scene of a crime or an incident where there may be trauma affecting that child, the law enforcement officer simply notifies the school that please handle this child with care. And this is intended to reduce discipline actions, expulsions, and other type of behavior issues. They don't provide any details of what that child might have seen or noticed or been at. It just simply says, please handle this child with care, and that they have been at the scene of an incident. It could be a fire, it could be a domestic, it could be something worse. But hopefully this cuts down on any type of disciplinary infractions. In Virginia, as I said, we're leading the nation in the threat assessments. In 2008, threat assessment teams were mandated for higher ed. And in 2013, right after Sandy Hook, we became the only state that mandated it for K-12. After Parkland, Florida has now followed suit with several others in mandating it for K-12, but we remain the only one that has it for K-12 and higher ed. I'm sure most of the folks on this call know that threat assessment is a law enforcement term, but unfortunately that's the term they chose, but it is really a prevention system. It's not meant to be punitive. It's separate and distinct from the criminal process as well as the disciplinary process. And it's meant to intervene with individuals and get them off of a continuum of violence. For individuals that are posing a risk of harm to themselves or other. And the focus is on behavior, not on profiling or any type of naming folks. It is simply at those whose behavior is posing a threat of violence. And as y'all all probably know, that process can go from having a grievance to planning around it, ideation, thinking about it, to turning into planning, preparation, and implementation. It is a systematic approach that Virginia takes to that, where you identify, inquire, assess, and then manage that ongoing. Again, it is not to put a child or a student out of school. It is simply to, in order to keep that child engaged, is to check up, manage it very much like hospital manages cases. Threat assessment is in code, and it is required that every school have that they have model policies based on model policies put out by the center. It does include all individuals. So that means a parent or another individual who's threatening harm, like some of the swatting that's going on now that's threatening to harm or pose a threat to schools. And again, as I said, consistent with our model policy. This past year, legislation was passed that was requiring school resource officers to be on those teams. It already required that there be law enforcement expertise. This specifically says that if there's an SRO, it should be the SRO, and if not, the local law enforcement agencies need to have a law enforcement officer designated to be on the school threat assessment team, and that they need to take training. Here are the folks that need to be on a threat assessment team: someone from counseling, instruction, school administration, and law enforcement. And as I mentioned, this is a whole disciplinary approach because each of these individuals brings something to play on assessing that subject matter. The subject of the threat assessment. Counseling might have had interactions, but the piece that a lot of people are concerned about is this law enforcement piece. But children are only in school 6.5 hours. The rest of the time, they're in the community, they're in a home, and law enforcement has interaction with those homes. They have a vast amount of knowledge of things that are going on in the community around that child and what might be going on in that child's home that could feed information about what's triggering this child. What are some of the interventions we can put in place? They're also going to be the ones to respond if the incident isn't at school, but something happens with that child off the site. As again, I said, we have model policies, we have information sharing guides. We develop videos and put out information that helps the school disseminate information about threat assessment to their constituency. We try to do the work that the General Assembly requires of schools. We try to do that for them and then hand it to them. I know that in the academic world, that's called cheating, but we want to make sure that they have the resources they need to do their jobs. This one just tells you basically about all the different types of data that we collect. I recently had the University of Nebraska take our threat assessment data and do an independent objective analysis of it to tell us what kinds of things that we aren't collecting data on that we need to, what can we extrapolate from our data that we're not currently extrapolating to make points. And so we have a whole new idea of what we're going to do going forward, but this is some of the stuff that we collect on. So as you can see across the years since threat assessment teams were mandated in 2013, you'll see that the number of threats have gone up all the way until COVID hit. And we will have, as I said, new data this year. But at the high there where we had 16,000 threats, it does look like that our schools are getting worse, but that's not the case at all. And that's why it's really important that we have an independent group look at our data and say, what does this really mean? And what this means is basically our schools are doing a really good job of knowing what's going on in their schools. And I'll get to whether these threats are actually turned into something or not. But 16,573 sets means that we have a lot of schools doing a lot of interventions, providing a lot of supports to our students that are in crisis. Here's some that you can see how it breaks down. Our legislation says that we have to assess threats to self and others. And unfortunately, as you can see here, over the years, threats to self is more than 2/3 of the threats that schools are dealing with. These are students who only want to harm themselves. These are not students that are going to harm someone else or we need to put in the criminal justice system. This is a cry for help. And as you'll see, most of these are averted threats. There are, as you can see, threats to others, and that has gone down over the years. Again, showing great progress in our schools about how they're bringing the cavalry to surround the child and give them what they need. And very few threaten to harm both themselves or others. And as you can see, the number of threats kind of remains consistent over the years. This is the type, the percent of threat assessments conducted by school type. And this is kind of what you would think if you have a middle school student, if you remember being in middle school, it's a really volatile time as people work through their hormones and figure out who they are. So it's not unusual that there's a disproportionate amount of threats given the percentage of schools that the middle schools make up, that a lot of them are here. And you'll see that in our threat data, most of our threats occur at those transition times, 6th grade, 9th grade, and then kind of level out as people learn how to deal with conflict and escalation and how do they solve their problems. Elementary schools making up 60%, but 48%, only 48% of the overall threat assessments that are done. But this is really important because if you've talked to elementary school teachers, they'll tell you that kid's going to be trouble. We need to get that kid support. They know from kindergarten on the kids that are going to need additional help and support and management. This is rather intuitive. They are school-based threat assessment teams. And even though our legislation says that we'll assess individuals that pose a threat, 98% of all the threat assessments being done are of current students in the school. If you look at overall the tragedies that have happened across the nation, a lot of times the ones that do the mass casualties are former students or non-affiliated folks with the school. And here's the real success. Overall, 1% of the threats made by current students resulted in the highest level being carried out in 2% of the schools. So if you reverse that, 99% of threat assessments are averted threats, meaning they have a 99% success rate. Threat assessment works. Most of the time, kids' behaviors are of threatening or posing a threat is because it's a cry for help. And coming soon is the General Assembly mandated that the center create a threat assessment case management tool. This is a large acquisition. We would be the only state in the nation that would begin to electronically collect this information as it happens by integrating with student records management systems. We would capture the supports that are being put in place and help the schools better manage their threat assessment cases. This is in their wisdom. The General Assembly didn't give us any money to do that, so we've applied for a BJA grant. If not, we have other ideas about how we're going to acquire this multi-million-dollar tool that's going to help us manage threat assessment rather than just through an annual survey where we're hoping that people remember to jot down what they've done with their threat assessment cases. And as I mentioned, we're also going into community behavioral threat assessment through our DHS grant. Safety audits, this crisis management, this is a huge portion of what we do at the center. It began in the 1990s and has grown extensively after 2006. It is a code mandate. Every school has to have a written assessment of the conditions in their school and identify and develop solutions for physical safety concerns, but also evaluate patterns of student safety concerns. So you'll see that the 5 components of the school safety audit address just that. Our school safety survey is the annual survey where we collect policies, best practices, their threat assessment data from schools. We do an annual division survey to ask them about best practices, policies, and how they're enacting legislation. There is a mandate that they review annually, certify to the center that they have reviewed their crisis management plan and that they has gone to the school board with recommendations, and they certify to us every August 31st. Every year since 2006, we've had 100% compliance for both the school survey and the division survey, as well as the crisis management plan. Every 3 years, they have to do a physical school safety inspection checklist and certify to us that all the schools in their division have had a physical annual inspection, and they have to use a model that's consistent with our school safety inspection checklist. And last, we do an annual survey of the working conditions and climate in our middle and high schools. We alternate that. Even years, we do all high schools and all staff, and middle schools on the odd years. Then we put out individual school reports that go to each school. Here's what your climate says. Here's what the regional data is of other schools in your region. And here's what the state average is. So they can actually measure where they are. Do we have more bullying compared to other schools? Do we have more of this? It is meant for them to take a pulse of what's going on in their schools, what their students and staff think about what's going on, because perception is reality. And that's where I was getting the data about SROs and how people feel about SROs. It is really important that if the state's going to collect data, that we give it back in individual reports so that schools can know how they're faring. This is student perceptions of climate, whether they feel safe at school, they know what to do. Look at this. They don't feel like gangs are a problem. Overall, they're not experiencing aggression. But look at these numbers, 97% know what to do if there's an emergency. 97% feel safe at school. These are really strong numbers. Here's just a few more that I've picked out from the student survey. And you'll have access to this PowerPoint later. Again, classroom instructors. And when you see a disparity between whether the staff thinks that rules and policies are distributed fairly versus what students think, that's when you have an opportunity to address why do the staff think one thing, but students perceive it another way, and where you might want to have some discussions or roundtables to find and kind of debrief that and figure out what's going on. Again, excellent information for schools. In the world of crisis management, this past legislative seasons, they required now in the school crisis plan that first responders have to be included in the review of those crisis plans. And while that sounds like a no-brainer, there's a lot of places that feel like it's my school, so we're going to make sure we know what's going on and what people are supposed to do. But the link we're missing is when the cavalry comes, when the fire department and multiple law enforcement agencies have to respond to your school, it's really important that they know what your school looks like, that they know where the cutoffs are, that they know what your plan is and where you're going to be evacuating and how you've trained your people. And so this has been required, this is required by code now. House Bill 741, which I'll get to in a minute, is schools are now required to have detailed and accurate floor plans. They can't be on a blueprint in the basement. And House Bill 1129, chiefs and sheriffs have to review the plans and make recommendations. Oops, wrong way, sorry about that. We have many Virginia-specific tools. We are one of the only places in the nation that has a Virginia safety planning guide for individuals with special needs. What we were finding were that when many people were doing their drills, they were leaving children behind that it was difficult to drill. So if you were in a wheelchair or you were blind or you were autistic and some of the lights and stuff, they would just remove them and not let them participate in the drill. So this can't happen. They need to know, and we need to have a plan so that they could get out. So we have a Virginia specific guide for how to incorporate individual planning for students with special needs. We have a new educators drill guide for conducting school emergency drills and a division crisis guide. I'm really excited about this. We're, again, the only state in the nation that's offering a statewide K-12 digital mapping program. We found $6.5 million during the legislative season when they were when the House Bill 741 was making its way through. And we are offering a reimbursement program to all Virginia K-12 schools to digitally map their schools for them if they don't have one. All they have to do is get a contract with one of the state vendors. They submit to us how much that's going to cost. We approve it, give them an MOU, they get the work done, and we reimburse them. And what this does, it allows us across the state of Virginia to have uniform maps on a gridded, oriented true north on a gridded map, so that if I'm law enforcement coming from another jurisdiction and there's an active shooter or an event that I need to respond to there, then I can have this map digitally sent to me or available to me, and I can know that I am going to J4 and I'm going to stage there, or I'm going to enter the building not through Mrs. Miller's English wing, which I have no idea where that is, but I'm going to enter through B4 at room 236. It's amazing that we're going to have this available. 89 out of 132 school divisions have already applied and started this process, and we're hoping to have 100% very soon. So we're really excited about that. We also are launching standard response protocols and standard reunification method. This means that hopefully once people take the training, they'll use the same words and codes no matter which school you're in. They know what hold means when they hear it over the intercom. They'll know what secure, lockdown, evacuate, and shelter looks like, and they'll know what your role is in those things. That kids are so transient, families move. It's really important across Virginia that law enforcement knows what codes we're using, that schools are all using the same thing, and that they have a method both for response and also for reunification, so that I know if there's a crisis at my daughter's school, that when I respond there, I'll know where my unification plan is, how that's going to go, and what I should expect. This Kate was born out of a tragedy in Colorado in 2006 when there was a drifter in Platte Canyon who went in and held a particular classroom hostage, and Emily Keys lost her life. John Michael Keys started the the nonprofit called I Love You Guys, because that was the last text he received from Emily. And this is the work that he's done in the last 15, 16 years. And it's just been amazing. And we're one of the first states to take that besides Texas and make it available statewide. We also have active attack training program. So we have civilian response and casualty care that we offer to civilians, but we are also training statewide law enforcement on how to react uniformly so that we don't have a Uvalde, where law enforcement coming together have all been trained in the same techniques. And as you can see there, we offer a plethora of different classes there. We're also trying to take that alert model, and that is run, hide, fight is the model that the FBI uses. Alert uses avoid, deny, defend, but it's not appropriate to teach kindergartners how to fight an active attacker, but it is appropriate to get them to avoid. So we are developing age-appropriate curriculum and videos around avoid, defend, and deny that teachers can learn, can take and teach their students how that works with their standard response protocols. We're developing curriculum around that so that, again, teachers, staff, and others that can't get out of the building will have information on how to do all of these things. And lastly, our mental health and suicide prevention program. If you refer back to my slide on threats, where 3/4 of the students were threatening to harm themselves, this gave way to us saying, hey, our threat data is telling us that we have a mental health and suicide problem in Virginia. And so we applied for a BJA grant for approximately $2 million. And this is where we're getting some of the money to roll out the Handle with Care, pathways prevention training for schools, and then a learning management system. One of the great things I'm really happy about is we developed out of, again, that grant, a public service announcement campaign of youth talking to youth suicide prevention. It's called No Talk Ask, and it's youth talking to youth about the need to get help if you're feeling down, depressed, and connect with an adult. Our youth to youth violence prevention program is Okay to Speak Out, and this is about students reporting aberrant behavior or concerns, because we all know there's leakage. We all know that there are students out there on social media saying they're going to do this or they're going to do that. These are cries for help, and we need our students to participate and help us in violence prevention, and that's our Okay to Speak Out campaign. Virginia, we do a great deal of training. As you can see, in 2020, during the pandemic, we didn't slow down, we amped up. So we went from doing in-person trainings of about 110 to we added in 176 virtual trainings and conferences, which is very difficult to do virtually, but we did not want it to be a time where we sat back on our laurels. So we really amped that up. Participants were reaching more and more each year. And we do, again, 6 to 8 large conferences. I'm really happy about this one. I want to tell you about it. Right now, the Impact of Trauma on Law Enforcement Conference is going on in Northern Virginia. But the National Threat Assessment Conference, we started this conference in 2019 after Parkland, and it was our then governor noticed that Utah and Missouri and Colorado and other states were asking to come to Virginia to meet with him and the Secretary of Public Safety to talk about the Virginia model for the center. And so we decided that, hey, why don't we just invite them here and have a big party? So we brought in, we offered a National Threat Assessment Conference in 2019. We had 38 states and 4 countries join us, 985 people. We're offering that conference again next month at Virginia Beach. You're welcome to attend. And it is all about threat assessment for K-12 and higher ed, but it also has a community focus. We brought in the best of the best national and international threat assessment speakers. So I hope you would be able to join us. Again, I can't go into all the training we do, but it's a lot. And we are now launching our learning management system that we will be able to reach all schools and campuses and all those folks that can't get off to go out for work to go to training. We're going to make what we do in person available online. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you so much, Donna. You covered a lot of ground and raised a lot of important points and topics that I'm looking forward to digging into for about the next 15 minutes. We've got some good questions from the audience. So if you don't mind me pitching some questions to you.
I'll try.
All right. So question about threat assessment teams. And I know you mentioned the different roles that are legislatively required to participate on the team, law enforcement, counselors, et cetera. Do you think that the Department of Juvenile Justice Court Services Unit should be included in threat assessment teams?
Well, first of all, I don't think that they have the personnel to serve 1,956 schools in Virginia. I think that link comes through law enforcement. So again, having dealt with students, I think you know that sometimes you need, while most of the management support can happen in the schools, sometimes you need the lever of a diversion program or a court mandate in order to get parents and others involved and take seriously what's going on in the students' lives. And that happens with law enforcement. While we never want to use law enforcement as a tool to put kids in the criminal justice system unnecessarily, oftentimes in order to access these needed services, they need to at least be referred to court services, and having a plate full of opportunities for diversion prior to even seeing a judge is really important, and again, gets them up to that next level where they can access these services. So I think that we already have access to that, and it's not necessary for them to be on the team.
Well, and that, that reminds me of an important point that you made. And I was taking notes throughout your presentation, and the thought that kept coming to my mind was myth busting. So you kind of busted a lot of myths about school safety, about how safe schools really are compared to what people think, about how threat assessment is behavior-based and not profiling-based. So, I think there's a lot of really important takeaways, including kind of the role that threat assessment teams play and the kinds of activities that they actually engage in. So that's really helpful information. We also had a really interesting question about the digital mapping tools that you discussed, and I was really interested in hearing about that. A participant asked, how can I find out if my child's school has been digitally mapped? And if they haven't, what resources can I share with them to let them know that money is available to help?
Well, it's on our website. All you do is go to the dcjs.virginia.gov website. In the little search bar, you can put K-12 digital mapping. The page will come up. There's an application form there. There's the MOU they have to use. There's a list of vendors that they can get with. And all they have to do is call the vendor, get them to come out, give them a quote, list the schools that they want mapped, send it to us. We sign it off. And when the work is done, they send us the bill and we pay it. It's public information. If they want to ask me whether their division is participating already, I can let them know. But it's probably best just to go to the school and say, hey, superintendent, are y'all on this? If not, why? And it may be that some of those divisions have their own mapping program. The great thing about this digital mapping program is this is what I call Bin Laden software. This is the software, the mapping program they used to accurately pinpoint exactly where Bin Laden was. And so this mapping is uniformed, and it uploads into whatever systems the school has. It'll go into their Raptor systems if they have a check-in system or access control. It'll go into all 911 centers. So all across Virginia, they don't have to do anything different. They just the schools have to get these maps, and then by MOU, they have to share them with law enforcement, to include state police, so that they have the maps and can respond and uniformly and know where to go. Because if you've ever seen the aftermath of a tragedy, it is a cluster of various agencies responding. People need to have a map in their hands digitally to know, go here, go to G. It's just a battleship grid. And that's what's so fabulous about the whole thing. I'm really excited about it.
Well, and that's directly on point for the folks who are located here in Richmond. We remember, I think, was it last year that Fox Elementary School fire happened? I have COVID time in my brain. But time to response was a huge issue, and that local tragedy kind of elevated the issue for folks in the Richmond area about the need to be able to identify the the internal structure of a school in a quick and accurate way for first responders.
Right, and the contractors are the state contractors that offer this software are getting back to us and saying, you know, it's abysmal, some of the maps that they're getting. You know, they're literally a hand-drawn piece of paper that says that's not helpful, especially on a piece of paper that they can't share with anyone. So these companies are going in, they're walking the building, they're making sure that all the doors are numbered accurately, and they're finding, you know, it's okay if unfortunately they numbered their doors inaccurately, but it's important to know that door 19 is wedged between 20 and 40, and they need to know that so that when somebody's responding and they're looking for door 19, they're not expecting it to be next door 40, but you can say go to door 19 at G7 and you're at the right place. There's not the confusion.
Right, right. That makes sense. And so you said that schools are required via MOU to share this information, but are the maps themselves required? And if so, what's the kind of target timeline on that?
The legislation did say digitally at one time, but by the time it got signed, it just says they have to have detailed and accurate floor plans. So with what we've done at the center is if you're using state money to fund this through our K-12 digital mapping program, you're signing off that you're going to share it with law enforcement and state police. And if they don't do that, if they don't have a way, the company is required to share them. So we know that they will get to where they need to be.
I see. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So another question about threat assessment. So a participant raised a question about privacy concerns as related to threat assessment. So if, for example, in the process of investigating a threat, if law enforcement officers learn about mental health treatment or mental health concerns or histories that the student may have, can threat assessment information be shared beyond the threat assessment team to other agencies or other law enforcement personnel?
No, not without parents and students' permission. So there's our data privacy issues around threat assessment teams. Like, for example, the folks on the threat assessment team from the school, they can acquire criminal data on the student through the law enforcement person on thing, but they aren't allowed to redisclose that. So there are privacy things, same thing the other way, any information cannot be redisclosed outside of that. Again, the focus is on prevention and intervention and to get supports as needed, for that student. And some of those supports may well be, a criminal process or a disciplinary process. They are tools that are needed in order, but that's not the purpose, and they're separate and distinct processes. They don't drive that. So for example, the threat assessment team may be working on a particular case or a student. They're hoping that the principal, who may have a disciplinary thing that he's trying to do, that they'll at least talk, because sometimes the worst thing to do is disengage that student from the school at that time. It might be a further trigger. So there should be communication, but one doesn't drive the other.
Well, and the kind of common thread that I hear you talking about with threat assessment is, a customized action plan based on that individual student's needs. And it could be mental health treatment, it could be disciplinary action, it could be supports outside the home, it could be a connection to community resources. There are kind of a wide range of student needs that can underlie a potential threat. And it sounds like by having these differentiated roles on the team, they can bring their various training and expertise together to kind of investigate thoroughly the nature of that threat and kind of figure out what's best for that kid.
Exactly. I mean, the whole thing is you're trying to create a puzzle picture and everybody has a piece. I mean, I don't know, I know Chief Annuti was on the call earlier. If anyone ever saw the diagram of what happened at Virginia Tech and all the various leakages, all the intersections that the perpetrator had with counseling, with faculty, with residential life, with law enforcement, there were red flags everywhere, but there wasn't anyone who brought all the puzzle pieces together to look at it as a whole. Each of those disciplines had a different lens on this particular perpetrator, and there were opportunities to intervene. And again, I'd like to stress, threat assessment is nothing new. It's just a name that's been put on it. Back in the 1950s, if Johnny was acting oddly, the principal would call everybody in, the teachers, the parents, counselors, hey, how can we help Johnny and get Johnny back on track? It's what they do. They circle the wagons and they say, what do we need to do for Johnny? The same process, only now we're adding law enforcement in, because as I mentioned, 2/3 of the time, the individual is not in school. And if you look at all the past tragedies, there's always information in the community that the law enforcement community could bear and bring together if there was that nexus at the school that brought it together, or in the community with community behavioral threat assessment teams.
Sure, exactly. And I think one of the key takeaway messages from your presentation that really struck me as most important is this reframing threat assessment with a term such as it is as a prevention tool. Because, for folks who don't have a lot of detailed knowledge about this process or this world, they might look at that graph of threat assessment cases over time and start to panic. But with the prevention mindset, with the sort of putting our prevention hats on, we can interpret that as signal detection, right?
Yeah.
We are doing the work of threat assessment. The process is working because threat assessments are occurring and they're being resolved hopefully in ways that are, most responsive to that student's needs. So it's not the threat assessment process that's problematic. That's part of the solution and the problem.
Yeah, most programs don't have a 99% success rate. And that shows you that teachers and faculty are watching and knowing what's going on. And when something's a concern, they bring it to bear, not to get someone in trouble, but to be safe for the rest. And so I think when Virginia, when we first launched it, we came up with something called Virginia Cares. And CARES stand for Caring and Connection, Awareness, Recognition, Engagement, and Support. And unfortunately, I didn't have a budget to do a marketing campaign, but that's what we call Virginia Threat Assessment. It's Virginia Cares. We care. We don't wait till you do something and then slap cuffs on you. We notice the behavior, we intervene, we get you what you need, and hopefully keep you out of disciplinary processes and law enforcement processes.
Thank you for that. And, I think that connects really well, this idea of caring, to the final question that I'll pose to you. And it has to do with this idea of the disconnect between citizens' perceptions of school safety and actual school safety, the actual data on school safety. And so it's very clear from your presentation that schools are objectively and legitimately a very safe place for our kids to be. But sometimes that message gets lost, right, in the community with students and parents. So, what's the best way to encourage parents or family members or the community to become more aware about the issues that are actually going on in schools, rather than sort of overly focusing on media or high profile, but, statistically rare incidents? How do we change the narrative around school safety?
Well, from a state level, we can do it by putting out the right information. That's why we have a state climate report where we disseminate that information in a variety of ways, through conferences, through e-learning. It's important that they know your kids feel safe at school. That's why my daughter's a teacher. She says even the most trying students will show up every day. They're the ones who are there because you know what? Because school is a safe place. When home isn't, no matter what's going on, school is a safe place. They're loved, they're cared for there. So we need to get out the data, but it's a fine line to walk, because people don't pay attention to school safety until there's a tragedy. And then it's very disingenuous of me to come out and say, yes, I know that 17 kids just died, but look, schools are safe. So it's a very hard line to watch. And so if my advice to parents is stop looking at the news and go to school. Go to your kids' school, know your parent, know your teachers, know your principal, engage with them, and know what practices are in place there now, so that you feel comfortable with what's going on in your child's school. Because yes, unfortunately, tragedies do occur, and sometimes the numbers are high and it hurts our hearts. But we in Virginia learned from that. And you see that all the things that we have in place, we don't want a Uvalde. We're having more active attack training. We didn't want a Parkland. I was asked to go speak to Parkland right after that tragedy, to their Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission. And I told them, threat assessment, this was a missed opportunity. The very next year they mandated, that very next session they mandated threat assessment teams. And so let's learn so that those deaths are not in vain, and that we are learning and moving forward.
Well, thank you. And that, it seems very clear that Virginia is an early adopter of these best practices and a national leader in, changing the legislative approaches and the policy and practical approaches to school safety, and getting out ahead of these tragedies as much as we can to make sure kids' daily experiences are in school are safe places for them to learn. And so, I'm a parent, and I feel comforted by the data that you've presented today, and you've given a lot of us kind of food for thought for how we take this message into the community and support pieces of legislation, and encourage our lawmakers to support pieces of legislation that help the center, continue to do the good work that they do. So we really appreciate your time and your insights, and spending your lunch hour with us. And it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Donna. Thank you to Dean Gooden for a great program, very engaging conversation. All I ask is that everyone please save the date for our next Lunch and Learn on October 19th on changes in U.S. Supreme Court administrative law rulings and their impact on the federal bureaucracy with our speaker, Dr. John Augenbaugh. We look forward to seeing you then, and have a great afternoon.